Uh, Hello, everyone. So today it's a huge honor for our small show, Indie Comics Talk. In 2017, I received a certain poster. I was at Kochi, and in Kochi Masters Binale, there was this particular poster of a graphic workshop which was being conducted. And I was very intrigued. At that time, I was not making comic, I was making some cartoons, but I was always in love with comics. So I went there, and there I met somebody who is like such an inspiration to every single comic artist in India. So Orijit Sir was there. He was conducting this workshop with many people, many students were coming, and he was guiding them basically, mentoring them to create comics on the spot. I think it was a 2 week workshop, and he was making this particular, he was making this, asking them uh, to make comics and based on the real life things which they can find around in Kochi. And I was very jealous of all these artists who were actually participating in that event. And I was really happy also to discover all this art. And in fact, he was very generous to have a conversation with me at that time. And this was, I think, in 2018, I believe, 2018 August, correct, not 2017. It's for
Yeah.
August, yes. And from there it kind of inspired me to start my comic career. Later in 2019, I started making comics. I started participating in Indie Comics Fest, and I learned more and more about Orijit Sir's career also along the way. And also he started putting certain these social media cartoons which like I was a huge fan for I think for a good 2 3 years. My cover page, I don't know if it's still that, but my cover page was the parliament which Orijit Sir drew with all the culture. So,
Yeah.
uh, and Orijit Sir, as you know, is attributed, is the creator of Rear of Stories, which is attributed as one of the first graphic novel in India in 1994. So it's a huge honor to have you, sir. So welcome to Indie Comics Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. We have many things to discuss, sir. So thanks a lot for being on this show. So we can start from the beginning, sir. So I knew that you had always an artistic inclination from your early childhood, but when did this real interest in comics begin?
I think right from childhood, growing up in the 60s and 70s, late 60s is when I think I started to read comics and stuff because I must have been like 5 or 6 or something. And At that time, there was no. I used to live in a. My father was in a transfer to government job, so we used to get transferred from place to place. At that point of my life, I was living in this small town called Mount Abu in Rajasthan, and there was not much access to anything. Anyway, there was no television back then. I think there was television in some of the, like Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, bigger cities. But anyway, there was no television network. And of course, I never encountered TV till I was in college or something. So there was no TV. There was one movie hall which would show movie, once a week. Some just for weekend show. They would show an English movie. Otherwise, they would show whatever some Hindi movies going on. So we didn't have much access to visual storytelling of any kind. So comics was, and of course there was no internet, obviously. So comics was the only printed comics was the only access to visual storytelling that we as kids used to have. And we were all I remember my brothers, my friends, and all of us would be really hungry for comics all the time, and we would. Parents never really approved of. Parents and teachers didn't approve of comics. They thought it was bad influence on kids, and so they tried to discourage us. And they would give us very limited pocket money because they okay, fine, you could buy one comic a month or whatever. We would use our pocket money to buy comics, but then since that was only limited, we had a very well worked out barter system where how I could exchange my Phantom for somebody's Mandrake or Amar Chitrakatha or whatever. Amar Chitrakatha had just started to come in at that point. And So we had this barter system, and then I used to try to copy the comics and do some bits and try to see how to make comics. And it was usually ended in failure, but I would never give up. I mean, I would end up discarding one project, and then after some time I'd start another one. And I think all through my early years in school, right through till high school, I continued to draw comics of my own stories and all that, but hardly ever would I complete anything.
I
But
have
that was,
seen it. I have seen few of the comics which you do. I think it's most was Tintin inspired comics.
yeah, quite Tintin inspired. I mean, Tintin, when I first came across Tintin was a bit later, as in, that was not my earliest because they were also expensive.
Correct.
But my father got transferred to Hyderabad when I was about 10. I mean, so we moved to Hyderabad. And in Hyderabad, we came across Tintin. And I must have been 10 or 11 when I started to do comics which were in the Tintin inspired style. I was very deeply I was drawn to Tintin a lot because there was something about the quality of those comics that made me feel like I'm entering into that world. I mean, it wasn't just like reading a story, it was like being part of the adventure or whatever. And so I was very much inspired to start drawing my comics in the Tintin style. But I continued to make projects and a few pages, come up with a story idea. I mean, there are various ways I tried. Sometimes I see a movie and then try to make a comic of that movie. Uh, but like I'm saying, I never got beyond a few pages in each project. I do a few pages. By the time it was taking too long, I would lose interest or run out of steam. And then later I'd start another one. Sometimes I would read a book which I liked and try to make a comic of that story. Sometimes I would take a Tintin characters and take a story from something else, some war story or some Beatles, one of those war stories that we used to get back then. So there was this character called Beatles, who was a pilot. And set around the Second World War or after that also. So then I would read a Beatles story and then I would try to make a Tintin version of Biggles, as in wherever Biggles would become Tintin, I would draw it as Tintin, and Haddad would be one of Biggles' associates or whatever. So, like literally do a mashup. I mean, try to draw Biggles like this. Yeah. So all this stuff I used to keep doing, and I think that was a huge learning experience in the medium for me. I mean, still now people say, okay, how do we learn comics? Can you teach us? I'm like, just read comics and copy them. I mean, just copy the ones you love because you learn so much just by trying to imitate the stuff that and you also realize what the medium is about. You also realize why, and what excites you, what makes you, what kind of, finally the thing about making comics also is that you should make comics about things that you really are excited about, or stories that you love, or ideas that really move you, whatever. That is a primary requirement, that you have to be deeply invested in the story and the ideas of that thing, and then you will make them. So you'll find your ways around, drawing and how better to do it and how to handle the medium. And I think that me trying to get stories from here and there, different mediums, from movies or from books, and then try to transform them into comic-like stories. It taught me a lot about the medium, how the medium works in relation to the other mediums. So the way you tell a story in cinema is not the same as how you tell it in comics, as in even how you edit it and how you kind of it's like even in the movie there may be like a slow pan over a big cityscape or something going on. In a comic, that won't work. At the most, you can do one big frame of the cityscape, and then you have to go somewhere else. So, but in a movie, there'd be a long dialogue or a monologue as the camera pans over the cityscape and all that. That's typically a cinematic kind of a language, and it doesn't work in comics. So when you draw comics, you take the visual idea from what you've seen, but you need to interpret it into a different way. So yeah, so I learned a lot in that process.
So when was the first time you created a like an end-to-end story or a comic which was like
Like a
was fully
long,
realized? Yeah.
like a long comic.
Oh yeah, long comic or even a fully realized story, right? Like start to finish. You said that you earlier you made 2-3 pages, but when was
Yeah.
it like one entire single story which you did?
I think probably when I was in NID,
Mhm.
uh, I did one project. So even in NID, I used to keep on. I was studying graphic design, so there would be like courses. Like for example, publication design was a course, and our teacher said, okay, go to the library, select a magazine or a publication that you really like, and then think about it and the contents, and then come up with a redesign. What do you think is analyze the existing design, and what do you think is lacking in that or whatever, or how can you improve it, and then come up with your own. So that's part of the course, the publication design course. We have to do that. So I managed to find a French comics magazine in the library. Uh, and I said, okay, I'll redesign the comics magazine. My teacher was not very happy with my selection, but anyway, whatever. So I did that. But I realized that after a while, I did the basic requirements of layout and designing a grid, and these are the things you're supposed to be learning. But I did that alongside. But to me, the important thing was the comics, and I decided to draw the comics. I mean, I was not required to do that at all. I just had to draw the comics in the magazine that I was redesigning. And probably that course allowed me the time to do that. I mean, I think I did my first complete story for this so-called magazine, this hypothetical magazine. Because I remember about the story of a bunch of characters who live in a forest, and the river has run dry one fine morning, and they're wondering what to do. And then they set out on this, and they realize that they live in this small kind of a foresty place. It's a bit setting like a Lord of the Rings, not so lush, but these little characters in this forest setting kind of thing. And they realize that, oh, we don't even know why the river has dried up. It has never dried up before, and we only way to find out is to go to the source of the river. Like, we've never seen the source of the river, we don't know where it comes from. And so the story is about this epic trek that these guys go up the river to find the source of it. And of course, it was quite funny also. I mean, in the end, they get there, and what they see is a giant tap. And the tap has been left on all these years, and the water has been flowing. And finally, somebody found out somewhere and switched the tap on. So that's how the river ran dry. So then these guys, but the tap is giant. So obviously these people were like small Lilliputian guys living in this part of, maybe it was not even a jungle, maybe it was somebody's garden or whatever. Maybe it wasn't even that long, but maybe it was just something that they have been living in, and in their perception of time, it's been there forever. But basically, some human had left the tap on. We don't see the humans or anything, but we see that the tap is a huge one, and that they cannot turn it on and off. I mean, it's very huge. So then the story ends with them doing very clever things and figuring out and finally getting the tap to come on again. And then they flow along with the river back to their place. So that was actually the first complete story, if I'm correct. Memory serves me that I did. That was, I must have been, whatever, my first year or second year in college, so 18 or 19.
And when did your interest then shift into this political social themes, right? Like, when did you realize that, okay, the comic medium can be used to tell these kind of stories as well? When did that?
I think I'm not sure where it all started again in NID library, I guess. I mean, somehow I got interested to read books by people like Franz Fanon and Paulo Freire and other left-wing evangelic left-wing writers. I came across even writings by Che Guevara and Gandhi. So I kind of started to get interested in political kind of reality, which is usually not something that is revealed to us, as in to say us, middle class, privileged boys and girls. We never have occasion to kind of mainstream people. We don't have occasion to really think about these things. Nobody asks us to enter. We're not expected to. And my family was not, I mean, they were progressive enough. They were they were not religious pedantics or anything. And they never instilled in us some kind of, my brothers and I, any kind of religious, except that Bengali, so there would be a Durga Puja once a year, somewhere, wherever we were, and we would go for that. But that was it. Other than that, religion played no role. And so we were not brought up with any kind of, let's say, we were free to explore things. They encouraged us to read books because I used to draw a lot. So my parents, even though they didn't have a lot of money, they would try to encourage me and give me whatever materials I needed as and when I needed. So in a way, it was quite liberal, but not political at all. I mean, there was never any talk of politics or anything like that at home. And neither did I come across any of that in school or college. I mean, politics was never a matter to be talked about. So I'm not sure where my interest grew from, why I started to read these books. And that kind of opened up my way of thinking about life, And maybe also inspired by some of my music I was listening to in college, like Bob Dylan or John Lennon. And I realized that art has a strong role to play in politically motivating people, So from there, perhaps also I got this sense that I want to be an artist who addresses these important political questions, through my work, I guess, yeah, because of that, because the books I used to read the library and then the music I used to listen to. So, of course, a lot of people would listen to Bob Dylan and John Lennon, and I suppose they never took those words very seriously. They were good songs. It was cool to listen and play that kind of music, but maybe, I don't know, I mean, it didn't affect my friends or others in that way that they took those messages or those lyrics very seriously, but I did.
Are there any songs in particular which you remember? Do you still listen to Bob Dylan and John Lennon?
Right. So with Bob Dylan, there's so much of his music has a political thing. I remember that is the song Hurricane about this black boxer who was unfairly charged for a crime and incarcerated for many years. So, I mean, I was deeply moved by the injustice of that story, And the way, of course, I might read it, it would have some kind of impact on me. But when it's sung in that way by Dylan in his voice, and his voice is so expressive of the emotion that he's kind of, so it had a huge impact on me. Songs like that. I'm just giving one example. There are many songs like that.
Many songs, yeah.
And of course, Lennon, so much of the song. In fact, till today, I grow my hair long. I started doing it back then, listening to Lennon. I said, I want to grow my hair like John Lennon. And I've always had long. I mean, I had short hair in between also, but that's been somehow part of my style or look that I always wanted to have. Anyway, so yeah, so to me, these things were strong influences at that age.
Yeah.
And then comics also, like Robert Crumb. I came across Robert Crumb when I was in NIT. And I was blown away by, again, not only the art and the themes and the kind of youth culture that he was sort of portraying and even criticizing, but also the larger politics of his work to me was fascinating.
Yeah. Even I think Paul Gravett's forward says that your work for River Stories is a fusion between Hergé's crisp, linear contours in Tintin and Crumb's gritty detailing, feathering, and hatching. I think your influences.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I think not so much now, but at that point, I was, probably trying to also copy Crumb's style and.
Yeah, I will jump ahead a bit to reverse. We will discuss in detail the origins of reverse story, but the art style of reverse stories has that kind of, as what he said, there is a fusion between two art styles. Was
Yeah,
that intentionally done? Like, because again, the story switches between the present, it goes to the early days as well. Then there is a lot of play around with the time. Like, there is, suddenly the characters which we are talking in the present are talking to the people in the past. There is a lot of play around with the time, and there was a lot of fusion of art. So, when did that decision come up, or was that something which was organically developed for the graphic novel?
yeah, it came up as I was working on it. But I would say that that's where I was going into a style of storytelling that I hadn't really come across it. I mean, by then I was familiar with Robert Crumb's work, of course, but also people like Art Spiegelman. Art Spiegelman's Mouse had a big impact on me in college. In fact, it gave me a strong sense of validation that my interest in comics was right and good, and not something to be, because like I said, from childhood, even my teachers in college didn't think my obsession with comics was a very healthy thing. They try to keep discouraging me from doing that. So I think Art Spiegelman's Mouse coming out in the mid 80s, I was in college at that time, was a huge, gave me a big sense of validation. It gave me, I understood that this is something that is what I want to do. And this is why I'm so fascinated by this medium. But I think neither in Art Spiegelman's work nor in Crumbs is there that kind of layering and surrealism. I'm usually they're telling stories in a straight up manner. But I don't know where that comes from. Maybe from the movies I was seeing also in NID, a lot of the old masters films we could see. And I was fascinated by some of the, I remember there were some very surreal films, I forget the names, but they're mostly from these Eastern European countries, some of them. I mean, we used to see a lot of movies from the Eastern European countries, probably because at that time, the NID Film Club, they probably had some tie-up with some of these embassies or whatever. So this would be quite varied. Sometimes it would be really stupid, sort of Bollywood, not Bollywood, but kind of rom-com type uh, silly stories. But sometimes it will be very surreal, very powerful, very dense kind of films. Then Tarkovsky, I came across Tarkovsky's films. I was like, wow. I mean, so I was definitely influenced in terms of visual storytelling by some of these filmmakers. And perhaps it came. And the thing about doing river stories is that I'd spent years of my life doing comics, but like I'm saying, thinking about the medium, trying out different stuff. But River Story, the first time I actually did a full book, right? And so I guess by then I was in a way kind of a universe of ideas about comics had kind of already grown in my head, and it was ready to come out into thing at that time. This is I did in between 91 and 94, 3 years I spent, and I had just gotten out of college. Well, I mean, I finished in 86, 87, 87. And so for 3, 4 years, I was doing these big like museum and exhibition design projects, but still always thinking about comics. And the exhibition design projects gave me some of those projects allowed me to travel abroad. And for the first time, I traveled to other countries and I discovered more about comics culture in those countries. I would buy some comics and bring them back. And so I guess it was a kind of a long gestation period before I actually started on River of Stories. So all these ideas had formed in my head, and I wanted to kind of bring it out. So that's how I guess it happened while I was doing it.
Yeah. So now we will go back. So the Narmada Bachao Andolan started, and at first you must be politically attached to the as a news thing, you must be politically attached to it. So when did that thought came that maybe we should make a documentation through a graphic narrative? When did that
Um, yeah, so in 1990, my wife Gurpreet, who is also from NOD, we decided to start a place called People Tree. We had access to this small space in Connaught Place in Delhi. And we wanted to do something where we could bring art, design, craft, all of this. And in those days, especially, there was a lot of separation. Oh, this is design. This is that is art. That is crafts. I mean, to me, I never saw this need to kind of these box things into these kind of categories. A craftsperson is not somebody who doesn't use their brain in what they create, and a designer should ideally uh, have hand skills to work with others, but also have their own skills to be able to make things. This was my belief, and I was not the kind of designer who would just do things on paper and done anything. And mm, and then an artist is not someone who just cut off from the world and simply explores in his studio his or her own world with no care about the audience or whatever. I mean, these were the kind of very simplistic categories that were understood about this is art, this is design, this is craft. And to me, both my wife and I, we both wanted to break those kind of things, create a space where the craftsperson is not someone who simply gets told by a designer, make it like this. It should be a collaborative process in which the designer can and the craftsman can come on the same table, work and work their ideas through, and then come up with something special. Anyway, so we want to create a studio like that, and that's how we started People Tree. So that was in 1990. And the moment we had that place, little bit I felt I had free time, because now I was running my own business. It takes a lot of effort and time, of course. But at the same time, I'm not doing a 9 to 5 job, or I'm not having to. So now is the time for me to try and make a long comic that I'd always wanted to make. But because of all my past, not I won't call them failures at all, but because of the fact that in my past I had not achieved a full-length book ever before, even though I tried so many times, I knew that it would require a strong and powerful narrative to which I was deeply committed. That without that sort of commitment to the narrative, I would not be able to complete anything. It would always run out of steam. And People Tree was located at a spot in Connaught Place, which is close to Jantar Mantar, which was the designated protest spot, which people who could come from anywhere in the country and do dharna, protest, put out their banners, whatever, express their problems. I mean, it's supposed to be a democratic space. Every democratic country is supposed to give a space like that for its citizens. So Jantar Mantar had been selected as that spot. And so people, it was very close to People Tree. So naturally, people started, people who would come for some protest or the other would start walking around Connaught Place to just because it come to the city from some other place and just to see. And many people discovered People Tree. They would walk in and they would see us. We were painting T-shirts and doing stuff. So they got very interested. Like, what are these? They thought that in Connaught Place they would only see fancy shops selling branded products or whatever, but they saw this place where people are making things by hand and putting it up for sale. And also we had created this idea that we don't want it to be just you come, you see the product, you buy it and go. So it was already a kind of place where people would come, hang out, meet each other, talk. And so these people from these protest movements also started coming. So one day a bunch of people came from the Narmada Andolan. They were protesting at the Jantar Mantar at that point. And we started talking at length about the whole issue of the Narmada Dam and everything. And I had already become part of a small, or like a citizens group of environmental group called Kalpavriksh. So Kalpavriksh was also being would act as a kind of a facilitator in Delhi for people from the Narmada Andolan. Like if they came there, then they needed some place to stay, or they needed some help with something, or they had to find some place to get some posters printed, or whatever it might be. So Kalpavriksh would be this, would act like this group who would help them with their needs. So I was already kind of somewhat part of Kalpavriksh. I used to go for their meetings, both of us, Gurpreet and I. But then it kind of clicked for me, like, okay, this is an important story, the story of the Narmada Andolan. And so I decided to go. Some people from Kalpavriksh were going on a study tour of the Narmada Valley and to see the dam sites and what's going on, the protests, everything. So I went with them. And that was my first kind of introduction to the place. And then when I was there, I realized, yeah, this is really the story I want to tell. And this is a story I feel I can hold and which will hold me enough for me to do a long work about it. That's when I started. So 91 is when I started working on it.
Okay. So what was your process basically? So you decided that you will make a story, then you at first was it like a research based thing in the first year, or did you had an idea with you on what the story should be?
Yeah, no, it was not like I didn't have any story or predetermined story or anything. I used to go there. Then after I decided that I want to do this, I made more trips. Uh, and of course, all on my own initiative, in the sense that there was nobody funding me to do this. I was just going there on my own. Because once I went once or twice, then I made enough contacts with people there. So I knew where to go, who to meet. And I knew every time I go, I find something new. So I said, okay, next time I'll come and see that thing, because in that village, people have done X, Y, and Z. So I want to go to that village next time. So I would have an agenda. Okay, now I need to go back and meet those people in that village, whatever. And little by little, so the story evolved as based on my encounters with people, the places I traveled to, the things that people said to me. I used to note down all of this, mostly just make notes and make sketches in my sketchbooks. And I had a camera, of course, but that was before the era of digital cameras. So I didn't have that. I knew I had like 3 rolls of film for this trip. So I had X number of exposures, and so I had to be careful with what all I took photographs of. And so slowly the idea started coming, but it never evolved as a continuous. Different bits came to me at different times, and then later I started to thread them together as to how to interweave these elements.
Kind of small streams coming together.
Yeah. And I think with comics that's always been something I've done with my comics. I mean, I sometimes do write out a broad script and I start based on a script, but I don't follow it. As I start drawing it, then I start changing things around. And then later, as a lot of ideas come to me when I'm actually drawing it. And then I realize, no, but this could be better worked out like this. And so rarely is it a linear process. It's always back and forth. Start somewhere, but you end somewhere else. You don't end up according to any particular plan. So same with River Story at that time. For me, it was a quite big and challenging project because I'd never done something that big before, and where I could tell the story of so many people, because to do justice to their stories also, and not just make it about my ideas about art and comics. It was challenging. It was a lot of research, a lot of time. And that's what it took me 3 years of traveling, drawing, sketching, and then coming back to my studio and starting to conceive of the story. So I drew, like I said, I do different parts. One day I'll say, oh, I want to tell the story about this woman, Relpu, and because I met somebody called Relpu, and she told me about how she used to work as a domestic, as a maid in somebody's house in city, Nagpur or something. Her story was quite fascinating. She was a good storyteller. I mean, she really told her story nicely, and it got my attention a lot. So there is one sequence of story, not exactly based on what she told me. I mixed up other things, but the character is based on this woman I met, and her name was Reiki. I don't know if I don't know if it's true or not. She said my parents called me Reiki because I was born on a train, when my parents were going for doing manual labor work somewhere on a train. I was born in the train, so they called me Rail. Rail as in one who comes from the rail. They call the trains rail. I don't know if it's true or not, but she laughed about it. But anyway, so she was that kind of storyteller who had this very interesting way to tell things. So anyway, so once I met her, then I got another idea about one more narrative thread. So this way I had many threads, and I was working to kind of how to like literally join
And
them.
Vishnu, the journalist, is basically is a representation of you, or maybe the reader itself who is getting into this world of.
Yeah, both. I mean, yeah, Vishnu was, let's say, yeah, he was like a character like me, who didn't know very much about all this, but he's going there on a professional assignment. And then he starts to discover the truth of it. And then he becomes a kind of convert himself. He's no longer just an objective reporter. And by the end, he is like an activist himself. And his article at the end reflects his position very clearly. So I guess in a way he was like a character like me, but it is also yeah, he was like I wanted to make the book to reach all urban Indians at that time, because today at least with internet and all that, people do get news from around what's going on. If they wish to know, they can. But back then there was no way to access any information. I mean, the Narmada Andolan and what was going on would be reported in the local press, but in the cities like in Delhi, there was no mention of it. I mean, even if it came out, 1,000 villagers gathered and protested outside the magistrate's office or whatever, it would be some small piece in the back. But they say, oh, 100,000 people to be displaced by that dam over there or whatever in this town. But it was just numbers, and it was like, but when I went there and I started to see, then I realized that behind those numbers is a huge tragedy, and there are actual humans, actual people whose lives, whose outlook, whose culture, everything is being destroyed. And to me, it became very painful and personal, and I wanted to convey that to the people, to my readers in the city. So I was never making the comic actually for other activists or people in the Narmada Valley. I was making it for the beneficiaries of development in the cities.
So that they also need.
Yeah, and that they should know the price that other people have to pay for what they take for granted, electricity, pani, but these are not just coming out of the air, out of thin air. They're coming at a tremendous sacrifice, being forced upon people without. So I wanted the city youngsters to know this. So that's what they were my target audience. So yes, in a way, Vishnu is also representative of a typical city youngster, who's not a bad person, who's not a thing, but who's not insensitive, but who just doesn't know too much about all of this, because he has never been told. He doesn't have access to the information. So yes, so it was both. It was me on the one hand, but and my reader, typical reader, on the other hand.
So in this story also there is one more thread of Kujum Chantu, which a singer tells the story of the earlier days, other tribal stories and everything. So and finally that same singer is the one who the politician ends up seeing, right? Like that's where the climax of the story comes in, and suddenly we are not sure whether we are in the past or the future, and it ends with the very. It's almost tragically funny what he says at the end. So when did that thought, like how to end that story in that note and to tie it up?
That happened, yeah. I mean, again, halfway through, while I was doing my travel research, all of that, I met other activists who were involved with the Andolan. One of them was Amita Bhaviskar, who's a sociologist, and she was, for her PhD, she was researching the Narmada movement. So we became good friends. So she had done a translation of this Gana, this creation myth of the Bilala people. And that was the first time anybody had translated into English. I mean, it was totally a very local language and local script, and not no script, local language, and a local song, which is sung on particular occasions. It's like a creation myth thing. It's not just, it doesn't exist in any literature or books. It just happens when some occasion or something festival happens or something. So so she had actually been listening to this song from different places in the Narmada Valley, and she had done a translation. So I was fascinated. I said, "Wow!" And she was still doing her research. Later, it got published, of course, in her PhD thesis. But at that time, it was like a story that was totally like it belonged to the people, but it did not exist outside of its context. So I was very excited by that story, and I wanted to bring in also to me the creation myth and the way it's actually about the river. The song is about the river itself, and the way the river is this sort of goddess, central goddess character in the myth is so different from the way we urban people look at things like rivers and forests. And it's like ours is a very materialistic understanding of these things, and their understanding is totally different. And it's just
they understand it for what it is, like a life-giving force.
yes, exactly, and they see themselves as products of that force and as part of that web of life. While we see ourselves as outside, we always talk about nature as though we are not part of nature, right? And we
Take it
think
for
of nature,
granted, basically.
and we think of nature as a resource. Oh, there's a river flowing here. We can dam it and generate electricity out of it. So for us, it's very always materialistic. What can we gain out of this thing? For them, it's not at all about taking in. For them, it is life, and they're very reverential towards that. So then it struck me that I need to tell the story of Malgugan's story also, as he narrates the story of the river, because that puts in sharp contrast the other story of the mining, the dam building that I'm trying to talk about, because this is exactly what I said. I mean, they kind of bringing these two stories together really brings out these two different approaches or attitudes to life that we are seeing. So I decided to include that also in the book and weave it in. And so that's how. And as you mentioned about the ending was kind of it took a long time to figure how to close the story. As I said, I'd woven in lots of stories, but then finally we got a small budget to print it. So we couldn't print it like 100 pages or whatever. So although I had drawn about 50 pages or so, or 40 pages by then, when we realized that we can only at best do like a 60-page book. Then I had to drop many of the stories I had been developing and rethink it in a certain way. So the ending was always like, okay, how to end it. And by then, many of the activists and others who I knew very well, I used to go and stay with them and travel around. By then, they knew what I was doing, and I had shown them some pages and all that, and they were all very interested. But they were like, okay, so how are you going to end it? Is the dam going to be built in your story, or are we going to win, and is it going to be like a happy ending? So I was thinking about it in different ways, and I didn't want to do either. That it should either be a sad ending of the dam being built or a happy ending of the dam being stopped. So I was looking for some other way, and then I found this a little kind of idea in my head, finally, which is more like posing it like a philosophical question to my readers, like what is it that drives you and why do you do these things? I mean, you think at a more, and not to put aside the question of will they win or lose. I mean, I didn't want it to go there.
You leave it to decide.
Yeah, do it on a different level.
So Kalpavriksh stepped in to publish the book.
I mean, they got a grant from the Ministry of Environment because they were getting grants to do these small nature books for children. That was one of the things they did, and so they would get small funding and say, okay, birds of Delhi or something, flowering trees of Delhi. So they do stuff like that, which is under the broad thing of environmental education. They were getting the grant from Ministry of Environment. So we plotted and we said, okay, let's put out this book proposal also as a, we won't talk about this anti-dam thing and all that. We'll just say it's a environmental education for young people. It's about a river, and we just put it very harmless sounding. So the Sarkari Babus, they won't get it. They're like, okay, whatever. So they gave a grant for it. Later, when it got published, that's why also partly I not only for that reason, but I kind of fictionalized the whole thing, as in I didn't mention it as Narmada River or whatever. However, it was a very thin. I wanted that fictionalization to be very thin, uh, so that people are made fully aware that this is a real thing. But at the same time, technically, it's a fictional book. But also, uh, I like that sort of space between fact and fiction. I mean, I like to base my work on very solid research and uh, develop the story from very real things. But then bringing this fantastical layer onto that reality. And in this case, the Malgu Gayan and the Gayana, that creation song, is what forms the fantastical layer superimposed onto the real layer, which is Vishnu's story, which follows my reality very closely. Anyway, so yeah, so that's really how it came
Yeah.
about.
And talk about, and at that time, the reception of the book, as I think we have already talked about it, it wasn't that great for River Stories at the when it came out in 1994. So, what do you think? Was it because an apathy towards the political theme of the book, or was it because people had a general not knowledge about what exactly comics can do?
Actually, if you're not, first of all, yeah, there was apathy towards the medium. Nobody knew about this medium. I mean, people only knew about comics as something for children, right? And then they expect that the children's book should be brightly colored and all of that. So this black and white book, which is quite thick and got thick as in compared to the comics, back then you would get 20, 30 page comic maximum, which would have usually like Tinkle or whatever, have several stories. So this longish story done in black and white, quite big and about some very realistic settings and characters, no cartoons. So it was just an unfamiliar thing. So bookstores, I mean, since we got it published ourselves with that grant, 800 copies or whatever, I used to take it to bookstores myself to ask them to put it on the shelves. And mostly bookstores, they could understand, oh, what is this? I mean, where do we put this? This is not children's literature. This is not proper literature. So what is it? And they found it all very odd. So mostly they would not keep it, even if some kept a few copies very grudgingly. Then later I went to see what is this is tucked somewhere in the back shelf along with some other useless things. Uh, so that was one thing that it never got out, as in to say it was hard to put it out. Luckily, because we had P2G, so in the end we sold almost all that first edition from P2G. I mean, slowly P2G became more and more well known, especially among activists and journalists and artists and all that. So they would come and they were interested in something like this. So P2G was probably the best. Luckily, we had already created the best kind of bookstore through which to sell River stories. But even so, it was just one bookstore, and it went again out to a certain kind of alternative people, not the mainstream. And that was one. Yeah, I mean, the publishers, of course, even after it came out, I could show the book in printed form to other publishers to see if they would like to do a second run or print it or publish it. But no publishers were actually interested. And also, I think nobody in the media thought it was worth reviewing or whatever, except for Khushwant Singh, who I got to meet through a common friend who insisted, no, you've done this great work and nobody's saying it, this can't be, you have to go, I will get a meeting with Khushwant Singh, we'll go together. And we did. And Khushwant Singh was he was very old then, but he was very interested and he looked at it and he kept a copy and he said, I'll write about it. And he did. He had a regular column in Hindustan Times back then and he wrote small, but very nicely written piece about river stories. But that's the only thing that ever appeared in the media about it. So yeah, so there was really no interest at the one level and no access also. I mean, there was no way I could get it out into a wider audience at that time.